Imagine waking up one morning and realizing something about your life feels slightly off. Not terrible. Not broken. Just different from what you expected. You wake up. You follow your routine. You do the things you're supposed to do. Work. Responsibilities. Plans for the future. From the outside, everything looks normal. But somewhere in the background of your mind, a quiet thought appears. Why does life sometimes feel empty, even when nothing is technically wrong? You may have felt this before. A strange sense that something is missing. Not success. Not comfort. Something deeper. Most people ignore this feeling. They assume they just need more motivation. More discipline. More productivity. So they try to push harder. Work longer hours. Set bigger goals. Stay busy. But the strange thing is, the harder they push, the more confusing life can start to feel. Because the real problem usually isn't effort. The real problem is something most people have never been taught to see. Your mind is following a system. A psychological structure that quietly decides what you care about, and what you ignore. A structure that influences the direction of your life without you even realizing it. Psychologist Abraham Maslow discovered this system decades ago. And what he discovered changed the way psychologists understand human motivation. Maslow realized that people don't actually chase dreams first. They chase their needs. Needs that exist in a specific order. Needs that silently guide what feels important to you. Which means something uncomfortable might be true. The goals you believe you're choosing might not actually be your own. They might simply be the result of a deeper psychological system shaping your decisions. This is why two people can live in the same world, have similar opportunities, yet build completely different lives. One eventually finds meaning. The other spends years feeling like something is missing. Not because of intelligence. Not because of talent. But because one of them understands the invisible structure behind human motivation, and the other does not. Maslow called this structure the hierarchy of needs. And once you understand how it works, you begin to notice something strange about human behavior. Most people believe they are climbing toward success. But in reality, they are climbing toward whatever need their mind is trying to satisfy. And until you understand that system, you may spend your entire life climbing the wrong ladder. Which leads to a question most people never stop to ask themselves. If your life is guided by your needs, which need is actually controlling yours right now? That question might feel uncomfortable. Because it forces you to look at your life from a different angle. Most people believe they are chasing success. A better career. More money. More recognition. But Maslow discovered something surprising about human behavior. People rarely chase success first. They chase relief. Relief from discomfort. Relief from insecurity. Relief from uncertainty. And the strange part is, this happens automatically. Your brain is constantly trying to satisfy certain needs. Needs that quietly decide what feels important to you. Maslow organized these needs into a structure called the hierarchy of needs. A simple pyramid that explains how human motivation actually works. At the very bottom of this structure are the needs that keep your body alive. Food. Sleep. Physical survival. If these needs are unstable, your brain refuses to focus on anything else. A hungry mind cannot think about purpose. A threatened mind cannot think about dreams. It thinks about staying alive. But once survival becomes stable, something inside your mind shifts. Your brain moves to the next priority. Safety. Security. Control. This is where many people begin building the structure of their lives. Stable jobs. Stable routines. Stable environments. From the outside, this looks like progress. And in many ways, it is. Because stability removes uncertainty. It makes life predictable. But there is a hidden effect here. The same instinct that protects your safety can also limit your potential. Once your brain feels secure, it begins avoiding anything that might threaten that security. Risk, uncertainty, change. Even when those risks might lead to something better. And if you think about your own life, you might recognize this pattern. Times when you stayed in a situation that felt comfortable, but uninspiring. Times when you avoided a change because the unknown felt too risky. This is the quiet influence of the safety level. Your mind is not trying to stop your growth. It is trying to protect your stability. Maslow realized something important about this stage. The human brain will always choose security before growth. Which means something uncomfortable might be true. The direction of your life may not always be guided by your dreams. Sometimes it is guided by your need to feel safe. And once that need becomes stable, your mind begins searching for something else. Something that has shaped human behavior for thousands of years. Not survival. Not safety. But something far more powerful. The need to belong. Once your mind feels safe enough, something new begins to take control. Not survival. Not safety. But the need to belong. This is the third level of Maslow's hierarchy. And whether you realize it or not, this need influences a huge number of your decisions. Think about your own life for a moment. The way you present yourself to others. The opinions you choose to share. The goals you decide to pursue. Many of these choices are shaped by a simple question your mind is constantly asking: will people accept me? Your brain cares about this question far more than you might expect. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. If you were part of the tribe, you were protected. But if you were rejected, you were alone. And being alone in ancient environments was extremely dangerous. Your brain never forgot that. Even today, your mind still treats social rejection like a threat. That is why criticism can feel uncomfortable. Why judgment can create anxiety. And why approval can feel so rewarding. Your brain is always paying attention to how other people respond to you. Because deep down, belonging still feels like safety. And this is where something interesting begins to happen. Many people slowly start shaping their lives around acceptance. They adjust their behavior. They filter their opinions. They choose paths that make them look successful in the eyes of others. Not always because those paths truly excite them, but because they help secure their place within the group. And if you're honest with yourself, you may recognize moments when this happened in your own life. Times when you stayed quiet. Times when you followed expectations. Times when you chose acceptance over authenticity. This is the quiet influence of the belonging level. And Maslow noticed something important about it. Many people spend most of their lives here. Not because they lack ambition, but because the need to belong is extremely powerful. It keeps people inside social expectations. Inside familiar identities. Inside lives that feel acceptable to others. But over time, something subtle begins to appear. A quiet conflict. Because the more your life is shaped by approval, the harder it becomes to hear your own direction. And that conflict often creates a strange feeling. A feeling that your life looks normal from the outside, but internally something feels slightly misaligned. Maslow believed this moment is important. Because once belonging feels secure, the mind begins searching for something else. Something stronger than acceptance. Something that pushes people to prove their value. Not belonging, but respect. Once belonging feels secure, something new begins to appear in your mind. A different kind of desire. Not just to be accepted, but to be respected. This is the fourth level of Maslow's hierarchy. The need for esteem. At this stage your motivation begins to change. You no longer just want to fit in. You want to stand out. You want your abilities to be recognized. Your work to be valued. Your presence to matter. And if you look closely at your own life, you may notice how powerful this need can be. You want your efforts to be noticed. You want people to respect your achievements. You want your life to feel meaningful in the eyes of others. This is where ambition usually begins. People start chasing success, better careers, higher status, recognition. From the outside, this looks like growth. And in many ways, it is. Because striving for improvement can push people to achieve incredible things. But Maslow noticed something interesting about this stage. Respect from others can be extremely satisfying, but it is rarely permanent. Because respect in society is often based on comparison. Someone earns more. Someone achieves more. Someone appears more successful, and suddenly the feeling of success begins to fade. Your mind starts comparing again. Looking at other people. Measuring where you stand. This is why many people feel pressure even after reaching goals they once dreamed about. The success they worked for finally arrives. But the satisfaction does not last as long as they expected. Because when your sense of value depends on recognition from others, your mind is always looking for the next level. The next achievement. The next proof of your worth. And if you think about your own life, you may have experienced moments like this. Moments when reaching a goal felt exciting at first, but the excitement slowly faded. Not because the achievement was meaningless, but because the mind had already started looking for the next comparison. Maslow believed this is where many people become trapped. They spend years chasing respect, building status, trying to prove their value. But something inside them still feels incomplete. Not because success is wrong, but because recognition alone cannot satisfy the deepest part of human motivation. Eventually a different question begins to appear. Not, do people respect me, but something much deeper. Is this the life I actually want? And that question leads to the final level of Maslow's hierarchy. A level far fewer people ever reach. The level where the search for approval finally begins to end. That question can feel uncomfortable, because it forces you to look at your life in a way most people avoid. You may have spent years trying to improve your situation, working harder, setting bigger goals, trying to build a life that feels successful. And from the outside, your life might look exactly like progress. More stability, more experience, more achievements. But sometimes a strange feeling appears. A quiet thought that is difficult to explain. Even after reaching certain goals, something inside you still feels incomplete. If you have ever experienced this feeling, you are not alone. Maslow noticed the same pattern in many people. The pursuit of success can bring recognition and respect. But it does not always bring fulfillment. Because success mainly satisfies the esteem level of human needs. It proves your abilities. It earns validation from others. It creates a sense of achievement. But recognition from others does not always answer a deeper question. The question of meaning. And when that question begins to appear, people often feel confused. They assume something must be wrong with them. After all, they achieved what they were supposed to achieve, yet the sense of satisfaction still fades faster than expected. This is where Maslow's theory becomes very important. Because the hierarchy of needs does not end with success. In fact, the highest level of human motivation is something very different. It is not about proving your value. It is not about earning recognition. It is about becoming the person you are truly capable of being. Maslow called this level self-actualization. The desire to explore your true potential. To create. To grow. To understand yourself more deeply. But reaching this stage requires something difficult. You have to move beyond the identities you built while chasing success. Because the version of yourself that was trying to prove something to the world may not be the same version of yourself that is searching for meaning. And this realization can feel unsettling. Because it asks you to question the direction of your own life. The goals you have been chasing. The expectations you have been following. and the path you believed was leading you toward fulfillment. Maslow believed this moment of questioning is extremely important, because it marks the beginning of a new kind of motivation, a motivation that is no longer driven by survival, safety, belonging, or status, but by something far more personal: the desire to understand who you really are. And once that desire appears, your life can begin to change in ways you never expected. At some point in life, a quiet shift can begin to happen inside your mind. The things that once motivated you start losing their power. Status feels less exciting. Approval feels less important. Even success begins to feel different than it once did. And if you pay attention to your own thoughts, you may notice this shift slowly appearing. You start asking deeper questions. Not just, what should I achieve next? But something more personal. What actually matters to me? This is the moment Maslow believed people begin approaching the highest level of human motivation. Self-actualization, the desire to become the most authentic version of yourself. Unlike the lower levels of the pyramid, this motivation is not about survival. It is not about safety. It is not about approval. Instead, it is about growth, curiosity, understanding your own potential. At this stage, your focus begins to change. You become less interested in proving yourself to others, and more interested in understanding yourself. You may notice yourself exploring new ideas, thinking more deeply about life, becoming curious about things that once seemed unimportant. Because when the mind reaches this stage, motivation becomes internal. Not driven by fear. Not driven by comparison. But driven by a genuine desire to grow. And if you reflect on your own life, you may recognize small moments when this feeling appeared. Moments when learning something new felt deeply satisfying. Moments when creating or exploring ideas felt more meaningful than recognition. Moments when curiosity felt more powerful than competition. Maslow believed these moments are signals. They show that your mind is beginning to move beyond the lower needs of the pyramid. But this stage is not easy to reach, because the world around you constantly pulls your attention back to the lower levels. Social expectations, competition, the pressure to prove yourself. These forces can easily distract your mind from deeper growth. That is why Maslow believed very few people fully reach self-actualization. Not because they lack potential, but because the demands of everyday life keep their attention focused on survival, security, and status. Yet something interesting happens when a person begins to notice this pattern. Once you become aware of it, you start seeing human behavior differently. You begin to recognize why people chase certain goals, why they compare themselves to others, why they stay inside familiar paths. And that awareness can quietly change the way you look at your own life. Because when you understand the structure of human needs, you begin to see the difference between living for approval and living for growth. And that realization leads to an important question. If self-actualization is about becoming your true potential, why do so many people struggle to reach it? At this point, you might be wondering something. If self-actualization represents the highest level of human potential, why do so few people actually reach it? The answer is uncomfortable. Because the same system that protects your life can also quietly hold you back. Your mind is designed to protect stability, not to chase uncertainty. And self-actualization almost always requires uncertainty. It requires leaving familiar paths, questioning expectations, sometimes even walking away from identities you spent years building. That is not easy for the human brain, because your mind constantly asks a simple question: is this safe? If the answer feels uncertain, your brain will push you back toward what feels familiar, toward routines, toward expectations, toward the life you already understand, even if that life quietly feels limiting. And if you think about your own experiences, you may recognize moments like this. Moments when you considered changing direction, trying something new, exploring an idea that felt meaningful. But hesitation appeared. Doubt. Fear of judgment. Fear of making the wrong choice. These reactions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of how your brain is designed to work. Maslow believed that the path toward self-actualization requires moving beyond these automatic fears. Not by ignoring them, but by understanding them. Because once you recognize how your mind protects stability, you begin to see something clearly. Many people do not fail to grow because they lack ability. They stop growing because their environment rewards stability more than exploration. Society often values predictable success, reliable careers, recognized achievements. But self-actualization is different. It is not about proving yourself. It is about discovering what genuinely feels meaningful to you. And that journey often looks uncertain from the outside. This is why many people remain focused on the lower levels of the pyramid. Survival, security, belonging, status. These needs are visible. They are rewarded. They feel understandable. But the highest level of Maslow's hierarchy is much more personal. It requires curiosity, reflection, and the willingness to question familiar patterns. Which leads to an important realization. Self-actualization is not something society can give you. It is something you must choose to pursue yourself. And once you start seeing life through that lens, your perspective begins to change. You stop asking what path looks impressive to others. And you start asking a much more honest question. What kind of life actually feels true to you? At first glance, self-actualization sounds simple. Be yourself. Follow your potential. Live authentically. But when you look deeper, something strange appears. Most people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of becoming who they truly are. Because becoming yourself requires something uncomfortable. It requires letting go of identities that once protected you. Think about it. For years, your identity may have been built around expectations. The good student. The responsible worker. The person who always fits in. These identities create stability. They give you a clear role in the world, and your mind learns to depend on that stability. But self-actualization challenges those roles. It asks a very different question. Not, what do people expect from you? But, what do you actually want to become? And that question can feel surprisingly threatening. Because once you start exploring it, the path ahead becomes less predictable. You may discover interests that don't match your current life. You may realize that some goals you've been chasing were never truly yours. You may begin to see that parts of your identity were shaped by approval, not authenticity. That realization can be uncomfortable. Your mind may resist it. You may feel uncertain, even guilty. Because leaving familiar roles sometimes feels like breaking invisible rules. Maslow noticed this pattern in many people. Even those who were highly capable. Even those who had the potential to reach the highest levels of growth. They hesitated. Not because they lacked ability, but because they feared the changes that self-actualization would require. This fear is subtle. It rarely appears as panic or anxiety. Instead, it shows up as delay, procrastination, distraction. You tell yourself you will explore your real interests later. After things are more stable. After you feel more confident. After the timing feels perfect. But that perfect moment rarely arrives. Because self-actualization does not begin when everything is certain. It begins when you become curious enough to question the life you are already living. And when that curiosity becomes stronger than your fear of change, something powerful starts to happen. You begin to see new possibilities. Possibilities that were always there, but hidden behind the identities you believed you had to maintain. And that moment leads to one of the most important realizations in Maslow's theory. The real barrier between your current life and your highest potential is not talent. It is not opportunity. It is the invisible tension between who you are expected to be and who you are capable of becoming. At some point in life, a quiet realization can appear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, as you begin to see patterns you never noticed before. You start noticing how people chase certain goals. Money, recognition, approval. And for a long time, it may look like that is what life is supposed to be. But something inside you begins asking a deeper question. Is this really enough? Because when you look closely, you start seeing something strange. Many people achieve the things they thought would finally make them satisfied, and yet they still feel restless. They still search for something more. Maslow noticed this pattern as well. He observed that even after people secure safety, belonging, and status, a deeper form of dissatisfaction can appear. Not because they failed, but because they have reached a point where the lower levels of the pyramid are no longer enough. At that stage, the mind begins searching for something different. Meaning, growth, purpose. This is the moment where life can start changing direction. But it requires awareness. Because many people misunderstand this feeling. They assume something is wrong with their life, or they believe they simply need another achievement, another promotion, another milestone. Yet those solutions rarely solve the deeper tension. Because the mind is no longer searching for improvement. It is searching for alignment. Alignment between what you are doing and who you truly are. And once you start recognizing this difference, your perspective begins shifting. You stop measuring life purely through external success. And you start asking more honest questions. Questions like, does this path actually reflect who I want to become? That question can be uncomfortable, but it is also powerful. Because it reveals something important about human growth. Self-actualization is not about collecting achievements. It is about understanding yourself deeply enough to move toward what genuinely matters. And once that realization appears, something inside your mind changes. You stop running automatically. You begin choosing more consciously. Which leads to the final and most important step in Maslow's hierarchy. The step where growth stops being a theory and becomes a way of living. Imagine reaching a point in life where you no longer feel the constant pressure to prove yourself. Not because you gave up, but because you finally understand yourself. This is the stage Maslow described as self-actualization. But it is often misunderstood. Most people think it means becoming famous, powerful, or wildly successful. In reality, it is something much quieter. It is the moment when your actions begin to match who you truly are. No pretending. No constant comparison. No chasing approval just to feel worthy. Instead, your motivation changes. You begin creating, exploring, learning, not because you need validation, but because growth itself becomes meaningful. Maslow noticed something fascinating about people who reached this stage. They were not obsessed with status. They were not controlled by fear of judgment. They were deeply curious about life. They were comfortable being different. And most importantly, they were focused on becoming, not just achieving. But here is the truth that makes this level so rare. Self-actualization requires awareness. It requires stepping outside the automatic patterns that control most lives. The patterns of comparison, the patterns of chasing approval, the patterns of living according to expectations that were never truly yours. Breaking those patterns is not easy, because they have shaped your identity for years. But once you begin seeing them clearly, you realize something powerful. You are not trapped by your past. You are not defined by the roles you once accepted. Your life is not a fixed path. It is a direction you can continuously reshape. Maslow believed that every human being has this potential. The potential to grow beyond fear. Beyond external validation. Beyond the invisible limits created by society and habit. But reaching that potential begins with a simple realization. You are not here only to survive. You are not here only to follow a predictable path. You are here to discover what you are capable of becoming. And that discovery begins the moment you stop asking, what does the world expect from me? And start asking a much more powerful question. Who could I become if I stopped holding myself back?